been a while since I've done an episode for this series, so without further ado, hello and welcome back everyone to The Last Stop, a series where I tell the tales of the last ever passenger trains of railroads that are either defunct or still active. In this episode, we'll be taking a look at the Orland Park Cannonball, a commuter train that was formerly operated by the famous Norfolk and Western Railway shortly before the arrival of Metra, the commuter agency of Greater Chicago. Anyway, let's dive right into it. In the late 19th century, particularly in the year of 1880, the Wabash, St. Louis and Pacific Railroad, otherwise known as the Wabash, completed its main line to Chicago's Dearborn Station. The line continued south to Strawn, Illinois to connect with the Chicago and Western Indiana Railway. As early as 1893, commuter trains started to use the 24-mile portion of the line between Dearborn Station and the Chicago suburb of Orland Park, and just over 15 years later, in the year of 1909, service was extended more south to the town of Manhattan, making the commuter line a total length of about 40 miles. Ridership was at its highest in the mid-1910s and 20s, so much so that the commuter service was extended all the way down to Decatur. At this point, there were already several trains per day that went along this route. Unfortunately, the 1930s saw diminishing ridership numbers for the Wabash's commuter service, so much so that the several daily round trips were cut to reduce operating costs. By this point, only one single daily train was operated, making every single stop imaginable, all the way to Decatur, a whole 173 miles away from Chicago. Imagine how painfully long this trip was. For about 30 years, things remained relatively boring and bleak in terms of this commuter train, but in another region of the state, the famous Norfolk and Western Railway was doing great. They already had several daily luxury long-distance trains going in between major cities such as Norfolk, Cincinnati, and of course, Chicago. By the 1940s, most of the luxurious trains and streamliners, such as the Pocahontas and the Powhatan Arrow, were making loads of money for the railroad, which were being pulled by the world-famous Class J streamlined steam locomotives. Outside of long-distance streamliners, they also had several regional and commuter services operating out of the big cities it served. In 1964, the Norfolk and Western decided to lease the Wabash to relieve it of its financial struggles, although it still existed on paper. By this time, the Norfolk and Western took over its assets, including the Chicago to Decatur commuter service. The Norfolk and Western needed to act fast with this as it already had a ton of issues. First things first, it needed tons of cutbacks. So in that same year, the commuter service was cut back to Orland Park and was given the fitting name of Orland Park Cannonball. The route of the Orland Park Cannonball by now went from Chicago to the Chicagoland suburb of Orland Park, as the name implies. Starting at Chicago's Dearborn Station, it made all local stops, which included 47th Street, Englewood, Halsted, Racine, Ashland, Western Avenue, Landers, Ashburn, Oak Lawn, Chicago Ridge, Work, Palos Park, Southmore, and finally Orland Park's 143rd Street station. The route came out to a measly 23 miles in total. The Orland Park Cannonball was operated as a single round-trip train, only running on the weekdays. The train numbers were 112 and 113 respectively. Trip time was about an hour flat for each trip, making the average speed roughly 23 miles per hour, not very good for a commuter train. The operations were actually pretty unique for this otherwise boring commuter train. For one thing, lengths often varied along with motive power. Typically, a consist of the Orland Park Cannonball was 2 locomotives, and between 4 and 9 Norfolk and Western coach cars. Sometimes a baggage car would wind up on the train's rear. The locomotives pulling the train were not passenger equipped at all, as the locomotives consisted of EMD's high hood variants of the GP40, GP9, GP7, and GP38 models, which at this point were mostly used for mainline freights and yard switching. Most of the time, a pair of GP40s led the train. The coaches thankfully had air conditioning and comfortable seating, otherwise it would have been a very unpleasant commute to work. On May 1st, 1971, as we all know, Amtrak was formed to relieve freight railroads of their struggling passenger operations. However, this did not include commuter trains or select intercity trains. With that said, the Orland Park Cannonball remained unaffected and untouched by the takeover. However, the Norfolk and Western would discontinue every other passenger train, with the Pocahontas being the last to go. 5 years later, in 1976, Chicago's Dearborn station would finally close for passenger service, with this train being the last ever train to use Dearborn. The last long-distance train left the station in 1971. Because of this, the Orland Park Cannonball service was moved to Union Station, where it would continue departing from there. According to Wikipedia, Chicago's RTA started to subsidize the train in 1978, which meant it was near the end of the line for the Norfolk and Western's last ever passenger train. With the RTA now providing funds, it was now time for the last run under the original Norfolk and Western name to take place. On July 27, 1979, the last run took place with the usual equipment being used: a single GP40 high-hood locomotive and 9 Norfolk and Western passenger cars. Train 113 left Chicago Union Station at 5 p.m. and made all stops necessary until finally arriving at Orland Park's 143rd Street station an hour later for the final time, bringing a close to what once was one of America's most famous passenger operations. 3 years later, in 1982, the Norfolk and Western would merge with the Southern Railway to create the current Norfolk Southern Class I Railroad. From then on, the line was known as the Norfolk and Western Orland Park Line under RTA. The RTA by this point was in a huge financial struggle, so in 1983, the Illinois legislature reorganized the agency. That reorganization left the RTA in charge of everyday operations of all bus, heavy rail, and commuter rail services throughout the Chicago metro area. In 1993, the RTA was rebranded as Metra, or Metropolitan Rail, which is what is still around today. By this time, the Orland Park Cannonball's route was rebranded as the Southwest Service Line, which unfortunately included several stations being closed and demolished, including all 3 stations on 75th Street. 13 years later, in 2006, a new expansion was built, adding about 17 more miles of track to the Southwest Service Line, now having a terminus in the village of Manhattan, Illinois. This also included 4 stations north of 143rd Street, 2 more in Orland Park, 1 in New Lenox, and 1 in Manhattan. By now, the new extension made the line 40 miles long. Today, the Southwest Service Line is still an important commuter rail line on Chicago's metro network, running 40.6 miles between Union Station and Manhattan. The line sees 15 trains in each direction every day, with 6 of those trains terminating in Manhattan, having a total trip time of about 80 minutes. The line serves everyday communities in Chicagoland area, such as Oakland, Palos Heights, and of course, Orland Park. The equipment used on the line is relatively conventional, with F40s and their respective variants pulling the usual set of gallery cars. Anyway, that's all for this one. Thank you all for watching the 3rd episode of The Last Stop. I do hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, you can like and subscribe if you want. Anyway, tune in next time when I discuss the story of the Baltimore and Ohio's Shenandoah service. See you then. And thank you again for watching. Have an awesome day.